The sun hit the sand like a slow-baked oven. The ArcLight Quantum Research Facility shimmered at the edge of the desert, pale concrete walls pressed tight by heat and silence. Madison Hale stood still at the front gate, her boots leaving shallow prints in the gravel as the guard looked her over. For the third time, her ID was real. The clearance was real. The jacket on her shoulders, though, seemed to unsettle more than it should. A flight jacket, deep brown and faded, creased at the elbows and cuffed by years of use. The stitching along the right shoulder curved in an odd pattern, subtle but deliberate, like someone had threaded a memory into the fabric. The guard returned her ID without a word. His look said more than enough. She nodded once and stepped through the security gate, the buzz of the scanner trailing behind her like an unwanted echo. Inside, the facility hummed with air conditioning and the subdued clatter of a place obsessed with control, white walls, glass partitions, spotless tile underfoot. Every researcher wore crisp lab coats, clipped badges, polished expressions. Hale's jacket stood out like rust on stainless steel. A junior tech with a clipboard gave her a once-over and cleared his throat. Without speaking, he led her through 2 corridors and a secure double door into a side lab. One glance at the dusty workstation in the corner told her everything. She was being benched. Dr. Malcolm Kramer, the facility's director of theoretical modeling, stood beside a glass display wall. His hair was silver, every strand combed like it had a clearance badge of its own. He didn't offer his hand. We'll keep you off the core systems for now. Data analysis, field comparison, nothing that touches simulation protocols. His voice was flat, dry as chalk. Her nod was small, careful. Her desk had an old terminal and a single chair. She sat without complaint. The air smelled like antiseptic and ozone, the kind that always clung to clean rooms and untested theories. As she unpacked her small box of items, just a battered notebook, a pen, and a sealed memory stick, the researchers across the room kept glancing, and then not. By 11:45, the lab emptied for lunch. Hale followed the stream toward the cafeteria, her steps slow, as if her body already knew what was waiting. The room was open, bright, and full of quiet hums and coded whispers. She walked past tables filled with laughing staff, laughter that dropped by half when she entered. She got her tray, didn't look at the menu, and chose the first protein and starch on the line. She carried it to a small table near the back, sat with her back to the wall. Across the room, Lieutenant Erica Sloan leaned into her chair like she owned the oxygen around. Her uniform was tight, her insignia clean, and her voice projected like someone raised on military parades. Is that from a surplus bin, or did Halloween come early? Sloan's tone danced on. The edge of performative. Hale didn't look up. She sliced through a piece of baked chicken. Methodical and exact. Cosplay jackets are cute, Sloan added, but maybe try something that doesn't smell like jet fuel next time. A few others chuckled under breath. The room quieted, waiting for Hale to snap. She didn't. She chewed, swallowed, dabbed her mouth once with a napkin, and set the fork down gently. It was a gift. That's rich, Sloan said. From who? Amelia Earhart. Madison's gaze didn't rise, but her right hand found the seam along her shoulder. Her thumb slid slowly along the stitched pattern, a motion so practiced it seemed involuntary. The table around Sloan rustled with quiet amusement, but she was already done performing. Lieutenant Sloan turned back toward her own table, satisfied with her moment. Hale stayed where she was, shoulders low, posture neutral, her tray barely touched. The air in the cafeteria cooled again as voices filled the space she had silenced. She finished eating 10 minutes later, not faster or slower than necessary. She carried her tray to the return bin, turned, and walked out with the same measured pace she had used to walk in. Back at her desk, she sat, opened the system console, and let her fingers move through the keyboard. She didn't look at anyone. Her jacket remained on, the weight of it constant on her frame. Her left hand occasionally brushed against her side, unconsciously locating the interior fold where the fabric shifted from uniform to memory. No one asked her anything that day. No one needed to. Their eyes had said enough. At 16:15, she paused her work, leaned back just slightly, and pressed her palm flat over the shoulder of the jacket. The pattern beneath her fingers was familiar. She traced it slowly, like reading Braille. The lines were not for show. They were record. They were the only part of the past still stitched together, and she was the only one left who could read them. The lab lights buzzed overhead with a sterile hum, soft but constant, like the sound of tension holding its breath. Madison sat at her station, eyes focused on a rotating data cluster on the screen, fingers steady. Her jacket remained on despite the temperature controls keeping the lab a crisp 72. She barely noticed Dr. Lee Riker approaching until his shadow dipped across her desk. He stood with a tablet pressed to one hip and his brow slightly raised, gaze not on the screen but on her shoulder. His voice was casual at first, the kind people use when they're pretending not to study you. That's stitching. It's not regulation. Not even close. His eyes stayed on the jacket, not her face. The pattern, he said, looks like a grid. Maybe even a cipher. Madison let the cursor hover above a data window for just a second too long. Then she clicked through and said nothing. Her face remained neutral, her posture unchanged. I've seen every unit patch in DoD archives going back 50 years, Riker added. That's not one of them. She kept typing, each keystroke clean and deliberate. There's a lot out there that's not archived. Riker gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He tilted his head as if that might change what the stitching meant. You know, some classified ops used coded embroidery during the Cold War. Mostly Soviet side, not ours. Madison turned toward him, her expression unreadable. She didn't confirm or deny, just waited. You're not Air Force. Are you? Riker asked. At least not just Air Force. I came from a compartmentalized unit. Her tone was quiet but final. She returned her attention to the screen, ending the moment without fully closing it. Riker stepped back, lips pressed, curiosity sharpening in the space behind his eyes. He didn't ask anything else, but he didn't walk far either. He paused just a few feet away, scanning the rest of the lab as if seeing it differently now. Across the room, two younger analysts exchanged glances. One of them muttered something behind a hand. Madison didn't react, but she noticed. She always noticed. At 10:30, a routine systems update flashed across her monitor. While others leaned back and checked their phones, Madison used the moment to reroute a raw dataset through a private directory. Her fingers moved quickly, deliberately, stopping only when Riker looked over from his desk. He said nothing, but he saw. She could feel his focus shift. He returned to his station, pulled up a console, and didn't speak again for the rest of the hour. But every time he crossed the room, his eyes tracked the angle of her shoulder, the way her hand sometimes traced the stitched line without realizing it. By noon, it was clear. Riker had questions. Real ones. Not the type you ask over coffee, but the kind you keep to yourself until you're sure you won't regret knowing. The answer. Madison closed her terminal at 12:03, stood, and stretched her shoulders slightly. The jacket creaked faintly, the fabric giving a tired groan like old gear with too many memories. She walked toward the exit without hurry. Behind her, Riker glanced down at his own sleeve. Blue lab coat. Clean, identical to everyone else's. He looked up at the worn brown leather again, then at the woman wearing it. Some codes didn't need decrypting to be felt. The simulation logs didn't match the math. Madison had been checking equations in the background for 3 days, waiting for something to make sense. But now the results were clear. The latest quantum field stabilization models contained a feedback loop that would fail under sustained resonance. Not just a variable out of place, but a fundamental error, one that could tear the field apart if scaled beyond the testing threshold. At 17:20, she saved a comparison overlay and stood from her station. The room was thinning as staff wrapped up their day. She crossed the floor toward Dr. Kramer's office with quiet steps, each one measured. His door was slightly open. He was still inside, reviewing a systems calibration chart with half a sandwich sitting untouched. Beside him, she knocked twice. He didn't look up. I believe there's a flaw in the new stabilization sequence, she said. It's buried in the resonant frequency matrix. If sustained beyond 30 seconds, it destabilizes under harmonic interference. Her voice was steady, no embellishment, just fact. Kramer finally raised his eyes. His expression was already dismissive before she finished speaking. That model's been validated by 3 postdocs and vetted through simulation. Your role is field data classification, not theoretical modeling. I ran comparative math against the prior generation logs, she replied. There's a repeating amplitude drift that compounds during transition. It won't show on short simulations. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. You have clearance to look at logs, not to interpret them. You're not a physicist, Ms. Hale. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once and turned without protest. He said nothing as she left. The door clicked shut behind her at 17:28. Back at her desk, she opened an encrypted partition and reran the equations, this time pairing them with harmonic field loads from previous field test cases. She didn't need simulation software to see where it was going. She saw it in the numbers. She had seen it before. At 18:04, she transferred the report and associated logs to a compact flash drive and sealed it in a flexible polymer casing. Then she reached under her jacket's inner seam and slid the drive into a narrow pocket stitched just beneath the lining. The zipper was invisible. The weight was familiar. That night in her quarters, the lights were dimmed to save power. The cot was unmade. A single duffel sat unopened in the corner. She took off the jacket slowly, careful with the sleeves. She laid it across her knees and ran her hand along the shoulder again. The thread there told a story no one else could read. From a hidden compartment near the collar, she pulled out a small, folded photo. The paper was creased, its edges curled. 6 people stood in front of an A-10C Warthog on a remote airstrip. Dust in the wind, gear on their backs. All of them wore jackets like hers. Her fingers hovered over each face. Ramirez, Intel, Faulkner, Systems, Kim, Uplink, Davos, Pilot, Nguyen, Mission Lead. Her thumb paused at the empty space between them. That was where she should have been standing. They were gone now. Lost on a mission that should never have launched. Because someone trusted flawed math. Because no one listened when it mattered. At 2011, she placed the photo back in its fold, slid it behind the stitching, and zipped the jacket closed. Then she sat in silence, her hand resting over the seam. Not to grieve, not tonight. Just to remember, just enough to keep moving. The announcement came through internal comms at 08:15. A senior DoD official would be arriving in 48 hours for a live demonstration of the quantum stabilization matrix. Most staff were already in motion before the message ended. Schedules were cleared, presentations revised, simulations queued. Everyone knew what was at stake. Funding, visibility, promotions, everything except caution. Madison watched them file into prep meetings and tighten their lanyards like armor. She returned to her desk and quietly opened the most recent model logs. The drift was still there. Same phase instability, same overload cascade. No one had corrected it. They had just buried it under layers of visual polish and keyword-heavy slides. By 09:20, Dr. Kramer was pacing the glass display wall, coaching his team through key phrases. Riker was leading a diagnostic sync with 2 junior analysts. The buzz of optimism filled the lab, but it made her stomach tighten. None of them were running raw tolerances. They were trusting visuals and simulated bounds, but those had failed before. She slipped out of the main corridor at 10:05, bypassing the staff lounge and walking straight to her quarters. Her steps slowed only once, right outside the secured storage room where flight test records were locked. She kept walking, not yet. Her room was quiet, spare, sealed by a single keypad. She entered and shut the door behind her. Inside, the cot sat untouched. The same duffel lay in the corner. No photos, no decorations. The only thing personal was draped over the back of a chair. Her flight jacket. She picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed. The leather had creased deeper along the shoulders since she arrived. Her fingers found the hidden fold inside the lining with practiced ease. A soft tug released the envelope. She unfolded it slowly, the paper dry from heat and time. The photo inside was black and white. A small team stood in front of an A-10C Warthog on a sun-scorched tarmac. The nose art had faded, but the call sign remained clear. Ghost Protocol Team Alpha. They weren't dressed like conventional airmen. Their gear was modular, hybrid loadouts, part pilot, part recon, part tech. That was the point. Off-book, cross-trained, plausible deniability wrapped in a mission patch no one would ever see. Madison traced each face. Captain Nguyen. He had been their team leader. Sharp mind, stable voice. He could diffuse any situation just by how he stood. Specialist Kim. Quantum uplinks, portable resonance rigs. Never carried a sidearm unless forced. Preferred numbers to weapons. Sergeant DeVos, former A-10 test pilot. She once watched him land with one engine out and the right main gear. Half deployed. Never flinched. Lieutenant Ramirez, Intel and comms. She could decipher encrypted chatter faster than it took to pour a cup of coffee. Smiled too often for someone in her line of work. Dr. Faulkner, systems specialist, civilian, technically, but he knew field protocol better than most enlisted. Always carried a backup radio even when off duty. And then there had been her Madison Hale. At the edge of the photo, 1 foot already stepping forward, helmet under her arm, eyes shadowed by the sun. She remembered the moment right before the shutter clicked. Nguyen had said something, half a joke, half a warning. She couldn't recall the words, but the weight in them had never left. They'd been operating in Kandahar under a prototype test directive, a new kind of field application for quantum resonance mapping. The tech allowed near-instant telemetry syncs across active zones. In theory, it was untraceable. In practice, it bled. The incident came during their 3rd live operation. The Matrix was engaged mid-flight. Davos in the cockpit, she and Kim running field calibration, Ramirez monitoring comms. the rest handling structure control from the relay point. At 1411 local, the matrix overloaded. Spatial drift hit first, then field collapse. It took less than 6 seconds. The blast radius leveled a 30-meter perimeter. The DoD called it a hostile strike. The after-action report was sealed within 24 hours. 5 names added to the memorial list. 1 body never recovered. They had written her off. The photo crinkled slightly between her hands. She pressed her thumb along the edge to smooth it out. Her name hadn't been carved into any stone, but it might as well have been. Her recovery had been unofficial. The reassignment wasn't logged, and the orders she'd received afterward came without insignia, return address, or a single signature, only coordinates, and a name, Arclight. She returned the photo to the fold, slid it back into its seam, and zipped the lining shut. The jacket sat in her lap like it had weight beyond fabric and thread. Not nostalgia, memory, consequence. At 11 she stood and draped it back over the chair. The day outside was heating fast. Another inspection team had arrived near the helipad. Staff were moving with urgency, running systems checks, correcting presentation lines. She stayed in the room a moment longer. The coming test would be full power. No more simulations, no more safe bounds. If it failed, it wouldn't be theory that broke. It would be bodies. She adjusted the collar of the jacket, brushed her thumb once across the pattern on the right shoulder. It was subtle, but precise, like fieldwork, like warnings not heeded the first time, and maybe not the second. At 10 sharp, the facility went silent. The automated tone for a VIP arrival echoed through the halls. In Lab 1, everyone straightened. Lanyards were adjusted, screens cleared of anything non-essential. Dr. Kramer stood at the head of the room near the main display, already rehearsing his opening lines for the 4th time. General Colin Westlake entered through the north corridor accompanied by 2 aides in plain uniforms. His ribbons were arranged in precise symmetry, his step measured and grounded. The general had the kind of presence that didn't need to speak to be heard. Kramer extended his hand with visible eagerness. General, welcome to Arclight. We've prepared a full overview of Project Vector and our latest field, stability. Westlake cut him off with a nod, sharp and brief. Let's keep it to results. Kramer hesitated, then gestured toward the screens. The lab lights dimmed slightly as the presentation loaded. Charts filled the wall, pulsing with field simulations, harmonic profiles, test yields. Staff lined both sides of the room in polished rows. Behind them, Madison stood partially obscured near the secondary console, hands behind her back, her jacket still on. The general paced the length of the room, slow and scanning. He didn't speak. His eyes tracked every face, every uniform, every movement. Then his gaze caught something, and he stopped. 3 steps from Kramer. He turned his head. The pause was small at first. A blink, maybe. Then he took another step forward, focused on the back corner of the room. His eyes locked on the stitching along Madison's shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. Kramer cleared his throat. Unsure. Sir. Westlake took 2 more steps, now fully facing her. The air changed. Whatever had filled the room before, authority, confidence, performance, was replaced by something colder, older, at ease, he said quietly, but his voice cut through the space. Everyone out. Now, Kramer looked up in disbelief. Sir, you heard me. Everyone out, except her. No one moved. For half a second, even the aides hesitated. Westlake didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The second time he repeated the order. The edge in his tone made it sound like law. The room shifted. Papers shuffled. Footsteps backed away. Murmured questions were silenced by one sharp look from the general. Madison hadn't moved. Her posture hadn't changed. Her hand slowly touched the seam over her shoulder as if confirming the fabric. Hadn't vanished. Kramer lingered near the control panel, jaw clenched. This is highly irregular. General, the team's ready to demonstrate. I'm not here for a demonstration. Now step outside. Kramer opened his mouth again but didn't speak. He gathered his tablet and followed the rest through the sliding door. As it hissed shut behind them, the lab went still. Westlake took 1 step closer to Madison and stopped. His expression wasn't anger. It wasn't even confusion. It was recognition, heavy and unwelcome. The stitching on that jacket, he said slowly. That's not supposed to exist anymore. She looked him in the eye and didn't say a word. Not yet. Not until he was ready to hear the truth. She stood at attention, chin up, shoulders square, hands still. Her voice came steady and measured, shaped by years of discipline and silence. Captain Madison Hale, United States Air Force, Ghost Protocol Team Alpha, Operational Designation 072 Delta, confirmed assignment under Operation Horizon Dawn, Kandahar Theater, reported KIA. 14 June. Status incorrect. General Westlake didn't move at first. He just looked at her. Eyes narrowed. The rest of his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. That team was lost. We recovered 4 tags, confirmed 2 by remains. You were never recovered, she said. After a 2-hour blackout window and an uncontrolled resonance collapse. Orders were cut above your office, sir. I was extracted under provisional status, tagged non-operational. Ghost protocol was erased from formal reporting within 72 hours. Westlake took 1 step closer. His tone shifted, still quiet, but heavier. That program was buried. We shut it down. Everything from Project Delta Vector was sealed under advanced decompartmentalization. If you were extracted, you'd be on a list. Someone would have... She raised a hand and pulled down her collar, just far enough to reveal the scar near her left clavicle, shaped like a bent line of char and tissue. The mark ran jagged down toward her shoulder, past a familiar burn pattern only field radiation could explain. His breath hitched. Quantum field surge, level 3 exposure. She rotated her wrist and opened the concealed seam beneath the jackets. Lining, from it, she drew a single laminated strip of dark polymer, creased but intact. She passed it to him, flat in her palm. Westlake took it slowly. He turned it over once, eyes locking on the red-tagged command code embedded in the margin. His lips parted, but no words came out. The identifier was clear. Ghost Protocol Alpha, Mission Archive stub, decrypted at executive clearance only. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't falter. We were test assets. Field subjects for early-stage resonance calibration. Recon at depth range, full tactical sync, no redundancy. The algorithm failed at 29 seconds. Collapse occurred at 32. Field rupture eliminated the relay team and destabilized all forward telemetry. He looked down at the document again. The room was still. The hum of the server units behind her sounded distant. We never authorized a repeat, he said. Not under this name, not under mine. You didn't, she said, but the design lives. Stabilization matrix 4.6a. It's the same shell. New interface. Same cascade threshold. She paused. You're going to run a full-scale demo at 100% load on a matrix with unresolved phase drift. The results will mirror Kandahar. Westlake stared past her, replaying ghosts only they shared. His jaw flexed once. When he spoke, it came as an order. Why now? Because they won't listen, sir. And I wasn't supposed to be alive to remind them. He took a breath, slower this time. The badge in his hand trembled just slightly before he slid it into his chest. Pocket. She didn't look away. Then let's talk about what comes next. Captain. His voice was lower now. Not soft, just serious. The way men sound when war comes back into the room. Madison nodded once, not out of respect, but out of readiness. She had waited long enough. The secure terminal activated with a deep mechanical click. Madison stood beside it, one hand gloved and the other exposed, fingers steady. She inserted the data drive without a word, typed a 14-character access code, then stepped back. The screen flared to life, casting a cold wash of light across her face. 2 model sets appeared, side by side. Left panel Arclight Stabilization Matrix 4.6a. Right panel Quantum Resonance Prototype, Operation Horizon Dawn. General Westlake took a half step forward. His eyes scanned the curves, numbers, and simulation outputs without blinking. The harmonic signature lines ran parallel for over 80% of the sequence. At phase threshold, the equations split, but the result was nearly identical. Collapse, rebound, drift, surge, then field failure. He spoke without looking away. This shouldn't be possible. It is, she replied, because no one buried the core logic. They just renamed it. Horizon Dawn was shelved after the incident, but the algorithm was recompiled under a civilian R&D tag, then funneled into contractor modeling through a shell program 3 months. Later, by the time it circled back to military application, no one recognized the origin, or claimed not to. She tapped the screen. In both models, a loop error repeated after second 31. Microfluctuations stack against amplitude growth, triggering field inversion. The simulation stops before it renders total collapse. But if run live, it'll breach containment in under 5 seconds. Westlake rubbed his brow, lips parted but silent. She kept going. We had a 29-second window on Horizon. The last field pulse was initiated at 14:11:02. Collapse began at 14:11:31. Detonation followed at 14:11:35. I pulled that timing from recovered sensor debris. Nothing here accounts for the threshold. He finally looked at her. The weight behind his stare was no longer suspicion. It was disbelief trying to find breath. Why would anyone replicate that data? Why take that risk again? Funding? She said. Legacy tech? Clearance rotation? Most of the original team is gone. The people who signed off on Horizon aren't around to raise red flags. And the ones who remember know better than to speak. She paused. Or they were told to forget. The general turned toward the terminal again. The side-by-side overlays pulsed in perfect rhythm. If you stripped the metadata, no one would know the models weren't siblings. She moved around the side and touched the console again. From her jacket, she withdrew a small strip of embedded fabric. Under the screen light, the stitching caught silver. She flattened it beside the drive. Thread ran in a curved, double-line pattern. At first glance, meaningless, but not to them. There are 2 people cleared to read this sequence. One is standing here. The other signs red-tagged death orders from the Pentagon basement. He didn't speak. Each curve matches a unit activation code. Every twist and angle is based on time-stamped op logs. Ghost Alpha confirmed insert at 0314 Zulu. 12 June. Extraction incomplete. I embedded the identifiers into my gear before we deployed. Redundancy measure. It was never logged in official channels. Westlake studied the pattern for a long time. Then he exhaled. Quiet. Slow. They're going to fire this array in front of DoD brass, she said. If it goes live, it won't just collapse. It'll fracture. Resonance won't stay in the shell. It'll ripple through every system wired into the same field frequency. Anything within the feedback radius will burn, then detonate. He looked down, hands flexed behind his back, then up again. So this isn't progress. This is Horizon, reskinned, stripped for parts. Sold as new? She nodded. Quiet. Steady. This is resurrection of failure, packaged to make someone forget why the first version was locked in a vault. And if no one stops it, you'll have another crater to explain. Only this time, it won't be in a combat zone. It'll be in a lab, with guests. The terminal buzzed once and returned to standby. She withdrew the drive, sealed it in her pocket, and stepped back. The screen went dark. Westlake looked at her for several seconds. Eyes clouded but no longer uncertain. His voice came slow, solid. You were never supposed to be here. No, she said. But I am. He nodded once, then again. And we're going to stop it. The briefing room filled quickly. Senior researchers, project leads, ops officers, and 3 members from the Civilian Oversight Board took seats without speaking. The tone had shifted before anyone sat down. Westlake stood at the head of the room, not smiling, not asking for attention. He didn't need to. At 13:02, the doors locked with a coded signal. The projector hummed to life behind him. He didn't introduce the session. He didn't gesture to any charts. Effective immediately. Captain Madison Hale will assume operational control of all stabilization phases within Project Vector. She will report directly to me. The silence was instant, then fractured. Dr. Kramer stood, eyes sharp, voice raised half a note too loud. With respect, General, this is highly irregular. Captain Hale's background is unclear. She lacks project tenure or classified authorship on... Westlake cut him off with a glance. This is not a discussion. Kramer's hands curled at his sides. His mouth opened again, then closed. Madison stepped forward. No salute, no posture shift. She inserted her drive into the table's command port and began loading the models. Her fingers moved quickly, the confidence behind them leaving no room for question. The screen split in 2. Left panel ArcLight Matrix 4.6a, projected output curve. Right panel Horizon Dawn prototype, classified archive. The room stilled. She spoke in clipped cadence. The curves are nearly identical. Input divergence begins at timestamp 002809. By second 32, harmonic inversion destabilizes the resonance shell. Simulated containment fails at second 34. Full field collapse follows. No one interrupted. She tapped again. Visual simulation activated. The room dimmed as the model played out. Waves surged. Boundaries fractured. Energy burst through containment like a silent detonation. She didn't narrate. She didn't need to. Halfway through the run, Dr. Riker leaned forward, staring hard at the matrix lines. He didn't blink. His hands stayed flat on the table. Kramer broke the silence again. Softer now. This can't be. These inputs were independently constructed. They passed calibration. Madison didn't turn. They were built off recycled core logic, recompiled under civilian contractors, then funneled into defense conversion through a redirected AI shell. The math wasn't reinvented. It was renamed. Riker finally spoke. His voice came out low. This is Horizon. He looked at her. You were on the team. Yes, she said. I was... The screen froze on frame 003502, shockwave radius expanding. Simulation fallout range eclipsed red safety thresholds. Kramer sat back down. He looked at no one. Westlake stepped to the side. Captain Hale has authority. Effective now. All demos are suspended. Full audit begins at 17:0. I expect full access to system logs, test architecture, and source code lineage. No one objected. Madison pulled the drive and straightened. She met no eyes, but the silence around her said everything. They finally saw the lines, not the math, the path, and it was leading back into the same fire. The room had not yet fully settled when the movement came from the rear. Soft boots over composite tile. One step, then another, deliberate and without hesitation. Lieutenant Erica Sloan moved through the thinning ranks of officers like someone walking against a wind no one else could feel. She stopped 3 paces from Madison, shoulders squared, chin high. Her eyes were steady but not hard. My brother served in Ghost Protocol logistics, forward staging, Kandahar. He never gave details, said it wasn't his to tell, just that the team he supported didn't fail. He called them legends, every time. She didn't blink. Her voice didn't crack. Her right arm rose in one clean motion, elbow tucked, fingers firm. The salute was perfect, not showy, not symbolic, just sharp and earned. Madison looked at her for a moment. She didn't search her face. She didn't measure the intent. She simply returned the salute. Slowly, precisely, palm out, wrist locked, arm up like memory made it reflex. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Sloan dropped her arm and stepped back. Her jaw set again. But this time it wasn't defense. It was respect sealed in silence. The room had no applause, no nods, no words, but something shifted. Eyes that once scanned her with doubt now followed her like gravity. Even Kramer looked down. It was Riker who finally exhaled, barely audible. Others stayed still, hands folded, breaths quiet. And in that moment, the weight of command passed not through orders or rank, but recognition, not because of protocol, but because of sacrifice remembered by those who'd never seen it, and now believed it. The lab looked different by 0740 the next morning, not in structure or layout, but in the way people moved inside it. The urgency had shifted. The noise was focused. Screens pulsed with recalculations instead of rehearsals. Madison stood at the center console, sleeves rolled, her jacket resting on the chair behind her. Dr. Riker was at her left, calibrating interface delay across the matrix core. Lieutenant Sloan coordinated the timing logs and thermal mapping for the shell. Model. Staff who had once dismissed her now deferred to her calmly, without question. By 0815, they ran the first full-spectrum simulation. Madison adjusted the frequency spread manually before initiating the test. The pulse held. There was a slight echo at 0029, but no break. No drift. The containment field stayed within tolerance. They repeated the trial at increasing intervals. First 25% stress, then 60, then 95. At full projected load, the model sustained integrity past 38 seconds. It held through spike conditions and recalibration windows. For the first time since the Horizon models were conceived, the resonance didn't fracture. Riker watched the data stabilize. His shoulders sank slightly in relief. Not slumped, just a breath long overdue. At 0920, Westlake returned to the lab. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't need to. He watched the final calibration run from the side, arms folded. After the logs verified, he approached Madison directly. Authorization for full oversight was signed at 0700. Her clearance was reinstated. Official. No caveats. She now led the Arclight Stabilization Directive under Joint Command. Designation. He asked her one question. What do you want next? She answered without pause. I want to stay. Make sure it doesn't happen again. Not here. Not anywhere. The general nodded once. Not as approval. As acknowledgement. By 11:00, the new architecture was being documented for peer testing. Staff pulled references directly from Madison's flight logs and classified notes. The lines of math she added weren't theoretical. They came from observation. From experience most of them couldn't understand, but finally believed. Her jacket stayed on the chair behind her. No one reached for it. No one asked. The stitching still bore the curves, the codes, the identifiers of a mission once erased. But now, they weren't hidden. They were seen, and the jacket wasn't armor anymore. It was remembrance of those lost, of what was buried, and of what should never be repeated. As the lab lights dimmed for another test, Madison stepped back from the screen. Her hands weren't clenched. Her posture wasn't guarded. She watched the data run clean. Her reflection caught faint in the screen's glass. The scars were still there. But now, so was the work. And this time, it held. The lab was quiet by 2046. Most of the monitors had gone dim. save for the central terminal still pulsing with the latest model log. Outside the glass, the desert sky was black and open, the kind of darkness that felt too big to carry alone. Inside, the light was soft and still. Madison sat near the primary console, a mug of cooling coffee in her hand. Riker stood beside her, one elbow resting against the console edge. They weren't talking much. Words had slowed down after the 10th successful simulation. She reached forward, tapped a line of code, and leaned back again. There was Harris. He was the loudest one. Loved to call cadence even when no one asked. Knew more about avionics than the engineers who built the modules. Riker didn't interrupt. Then there was Lynn, brilliant with signals. Could route a tactical array blindfolded. Hated coffee. Never missed a shot on the range. She smiled, small and tired. Ortiz kept all the jokes going, even when the radios were dead. Especially then. I think he knew. I think he saw what was coming before any of us. Her fingers brushed the edge of the keyboard, then dropped to her lap. Nash was my wing. He flew low so I didn't have to. Always said altitude's just a number until it isn't. Riker finally sat. And Sergeant Venn, he was the oldest. Did 2 tours before Ghost Protocol even formed. Used to write his daughter letters by hand. Said encryption was good, but paper was better. The silence stretched after that. The jacket hung behind her chair, sleeves loose, shoulder seams relaxed in the low light. The stitching caught a gleam from the console's standby glow. It didn't look like camouflage anymore. It looked like memory, framed by light. She didn't turn to look at it. They never asked for medals. Most of them didn't even like pictures. But they were the reason this works now. Every one of them left something behind so we could find the path forward. Riker nodded. He didn't speak again. The hum of the system settled into a steady rhythm. Outside, wind brushed faint against the outer seal of the building. Madison leaned forward, typed a final line into the log, and saved the file. The jacket stayed where it was. She stood slowly, joints a little stiff from hours at the terminal. But there was no heaviness in her steps, no shadow trailing her shoulders. Just focus, just quiet purpose. As she crossed the room, the light behind her caught the curve of her collarbone, the slight rise of a healed scar, the echo of something that had once broken and been rebuilt stronger. And in that last frame, before the scene faded, her voice came through. Not loud, not proud, just sure. Some people change the world without ever asking it to notice. They just show up and don't stop.